Hello everyone, welcome to PW English YouTube channel. I'm Shalini Somashekar, your botany teacher. I welcome you all to this brand new Ummeed NEET English batch that is targeted for all the NEET 2025 aspirants. Before I start off with today's lecture, I want to tell you a little bit about this batch and what you can expect from it. This is a free batch that is available to you on YouTube as well as the PW app. On YouTube, you can see the lectures. On PW app, you can watch the lectures without any ads, and also along with lectures, you will be provided with notes and DPP questions for practice. Alright, so notes, what is notes? Basically, whatever slides we use to explain concepts to you with the annotations and everything, the same notes, the same PDF will be available to you as notes on the app, and also questions for practice will be available. Even though it is on the app, it is completely free of cost. You do not have to pay even a single rupee to access this particular batch. The link to this batch is provided in the description box. Kindly click and enroll so that you can get access to the notes as well as the DPP questions. Alright, so I hope maximum number of students will utilize this batch. And also another thing, what is the format going to be? In this batch, you're going to get recorded sessions. For every chapter, there's going to be one lecture. It's a one-shot lecture. Generally, one-shot lecture is a summaries. But over here, every one-shot lecture will be as detailed as possible. And you will have one lecture per chapter in every subject: physics, chemistry, botany and zoology. We're starting this batch with the botany lecture, which is today's lecture, which is this very lecture. Today, we're going to start with the chapter, The Living World. I'm sure as NEET aspirants, every one of you will know that the NEET syllabus includes both 11th grade and 12th grade chapters, right? So, we're starting with the 11th grade chapters. Eventually, after this, we will do the 12th grade chapters, all right? So, the first chapter in NCERT in 11th grade is Living World, and that is what we're going to start with today. So, without any further ado, let's get today's session started. Yeah, like I already mentioned, in one shot, I will be covering all of the concepts in this chapter. Before we start off discussing the concepts included in the chapter, I'll give you a quick overview of how many questions have been asked from this chapter in the previous NEET exams. I have considered data from 2016 NEET exam because that is when NEET was made an all India medical entrance test across India. So, if you look at the data, you know that from this chapter, around 1 to 2 questions can be asked. Very rarely, 3 questions also have been asked. So, this kind of gives us an idea of how many questions you can expect from this chapter. But just because there are, in the last 2 years, no questions have been asked from this chapter, doesn't mean in the coming NEET exam, no question will be asked. You could get 3 questions like 2016 phase 2 NEET exam also. So, let's be prepared, hoping that no matter in which nook and corner of NCERT they will ask us questions, we are so well prepared, we will be able to answer it effortlessly. Alright, so this is the analysis of how many questions have been asked to NEET from this chapter over the last couple of years. Alright, now let's talk about what all concepts are included in this chapter. Now, many of you might have doubts. Should we refer the old NCERT? Should we refer the new NCERT? Which is the most, suitable book to study from? Actually, it differs from chapter to chapter. It depends on which chapter you study. Okay. Currently, if you look at the new NCERT, okay, we'll talk about the old NCERT first. In old NCERT, you have one topic. The chapter begins with a topic called What is Living? Okay, you have what is living, and then you have taxonomy, basically taxonomic categories and classification and all of that. And then you have something called taxonomic aids. Okay. In the new NCERT textbook, you have taxonomy part only. You don't have what is living, you don't have taxonomic aids. But if you look at the NEET syllabus, NMC released NEET syllabus for 2025 exam. I've added a screenshot of it over here Because I know when I'm teaching the concept what is living, a lot of you will jump in the comment section and say this is not even part of the syllabus. Why is this lady teaching it and all of that? So just to give you clarity, this is a screenshot of the NEET syllabus released by NMC, released by NTA for 2025. As you can clearly see here, what is living is very much a part of the syllabus. After that, you have biodiversity, why should we classify living organisms, taxonomical categories and all of that. What is not there, what is deleted in the NEET syllabus is taxonomic aids. You still have what is living, you still have diversity, biological classification and all of that. So if you want to prepare for NEET 2025, this chapter you should study or refer the old NCERT itself, which includes this concept which is called what is living. Alright, this concept is missing in the new NCERT. If you look it up on Google, you can find the PDF of old NCERT. You can study from it. Alright, alright then, we'll move on and start talking about Ernst Mayr. If you've noticed, in the NCERT biology textbook, there are many units. At the beginning of each unit, there is a mention of a scientist and all of the contributions of that particular scientist in the field of biological research. Okay, at the beginning of the unit Diversity in the Living World, you have information about this researcher, this scientist called Ernst Mayr. At one time in the NEET exam, question was asked from one of his contributions also. So what are the important points that you need to remember about Ernst Mayr? I'll let you know now. When he was born, where he was born are not really that important. What is important is that he is called the Darwin of the 20th century. He is also regarded as one of the 100 greatest scientists of all time. Okay, so these are important points that you will have to remember, keep in mind. One more important thing is, he is the one to have defined species according to the biological species concept. Currently, whatever is the most widely accepted definition of species, that was provided by Ernst Mayr itself. He pioneered the currently accepted definition of a biological species. How do we define species today? We define species as a group of organisms which can interbreed and give rise to a fertile offspring. The reason why we call an Alsatian dog or a German Shepherd dog and a pug, though they don't look alike, why do we call them the same species? Why do we call them the same species dog? Is because when a pug interbreeds with a German Shepherd, whatever offspring will be produced, it will be fertile. It will further be capable of reproducing. That is what defines it as one species. Though a horse and a donkey can produce an offspring, why don't we call horse and donkey as the same species? Of course, they are capable of interbreeding, but the offspring that is produced is not fertile. Mule cannot reproduce. Okay, so what is biological species concept? According to it, a species is defined as a group of organisms which are capable of interbreeding and giving rise to fertile offspring. That is what biological species is. And that definition and the work on the biological species concept was pioneered, was initiated, and that was his contribution, Ernst Mayr's contribution, one of his major contributions, you can say. And also, Ernst Mayr was awarded several prizes through his life. There are 3 very renowned prizes or awards in biology. They are the Balzan Prize, the International Prize for Biology, and the Crafoord Prize. He was a recipient of all of these 3 very prestigious awards in biology, and generally they call it the Triple Queen. Okay, so he was awarded all 3 of them. So these are some points that I want you all to keep in mind and remember. What are the points? He is called the Darwin of 20th century. He was regarded as one of the 100 greatest scientists of all time in the world. Okay, and then he won the Triple Queen, all the 3 prizes. He is the one who pioneered the species, biological species concept. Okay, so these are some things that I want you all to keep in mind. Now, how does this chapter begin? This chapter begins with the concept, what is living? What is living? You can think about it in two ways. One way is biologically, technically, what is living? I am living, this stylus is not living, this pen is not living. What differentiates this pen from me? What do I have that this pen does not have, which is making me living? This is one direction of thinking. There's another way of thinking about life, which is philosophical. Like, what is life? What is my purpose on this earth? Why am I even alive? So that is a philosophical way of thinking about life. You can think about it either ways. But in biology, we will not worry about philosophy. We will understand what makes a living organism living. What are some characters that I have which a non-living thing does not have? So we are going to delve into the details of that. Okay. So about living, differences between living and non-living things, it's not something new that you're learning. You've been learning about it ever since you were probably in first or second grade, right? So you know what are the features of living, what are the features of non-living things, right? So we know that there are certain characters that living organisms will show. The list is right here on the board. What are some characteristic features? Living organisms show growth. We increase in size. We all were little babies, and then we became toddlers, and then we grew up to be teenagers, and then right now I'm an adult. So growth is happening, right? So growth happens in us, growth happens in plants, growth happens in unicellular organisms. So in living organisms, you see growth. It's a characteristic feature of living organism. Reproduction. Even though so many people are dying all the time, human species does not end. The reason is we reproduce, give rise to the next generation so that the species is getting continued. This is true for all species, right? Asexually or sexually, we all do undergo reproduction, right? So reproduction is a characteristic feature of living organisms. If I keep this pen right here for 20 years, this will not show any growth. This will not make an extra copy and reproduce, right? So these are things that we see in living organisms. Next, metabolism. Right now, as I speak, a lot of chemical reactions are happening inside of my body. As you all are listening very intently, hopefully, a lot of chemical reactions are happening inside your body. While I'm moving my hands like this, while I'm moving my jaw and tongue to speak, neurons are firing messages to my muscles. Unless I get that message from my brain, my muscles will not contract. It will not move. What is making my muscles to contract? Inside my skeletal muscle cells, there are actin and myosin proteins that are present. They are sliding against each other and causing my muscle to contract. As you all are listening to me, as you all are watching me right now, information is passing from your sensory organs to your brain via sensory nerves. So chemical signals are being sent, electric signals are being sent to different parts of your brain, right? So all of these are chemical reactions. Consider a plant for that matter. Within the green leaves, photosynthesis will be taking place. Within every one of our cells right now as I speak, energy is being synthesized, ATP is being produced. So chemical reactions happen in living organisms. Do those chemical reactions happen in non-living things? Not really, right? So those reactions that happen in living organisms are called metabolic reactions. Metabolic reactions, you don't see them in non-living organisms, non-living things. Okay, so that is also a characteristic feature of living organisms. Then cellular organization. We all are composed of cells and cell products. More about it you will learn in a chapter called Cell, the Unit of Life. Okay. So we know, be it unicellular or multicellular organisms, all of us are made up of cells, right? And this cell is not a random arrangement. There is proper organization, an orderly organization of organelles within the cells, cells within the tissues. Unless the cellular organization is there, we don't call it living, right? So cellular organization also is an important feature. Consciousness. Consciousness is being aware of our surroundings. We are aware of what is happening around us with the help of our sense organs. At least humans, we know. I hear a sound from behind, I know it could be a threat. I can, sense some odors around me, and then I can see what is happening. I have peripheral vision. If somebody is attacking from this side, I will know. So not that anybody would want to attack, we're just saying. So you are aware of what is happening around you, right? And that is consciousness. That awareness that we have of our surroundings is consciousness. And as you have awareness, you will also respond to certain stimuli, right? Because you are aware of what is happening around you, sometimes we respond to certain stimuli. More about it, we'll learn in detail. While all of these can be observed in living organisms, only some of them are called defining features. Defining features. When can you call this a defining feature of living organism? We have to check, understand each one of these different characteristics of life and examine whether it is a defining feature of living organisms. For these characters to be the defining feature, it has to fulfill two criteria. What are those two criteria? Firstly, it should happen in all living organisms. Without exception, it should happen, it should hold true for all living organisms. The second criterion is that particular characteristic should happen only in living organisms. If it happens, if it is true for all living organisms, but happens in non-living things also, then it is not a defining feature. It is not a defining feature. If it happens only in living organisms, but in some living organisms it doesn't happen, then also it is not a defining feature. Then we can say it's just a characteristic of living organism, but not a defining feature. For any characteristic to be called a defining feature, it should happen in all living organisms without exception, and it should never happen in non-living things, non-living objects. Only then we can call it defining feature. Alright, I hope that is clear. We'll go through all of these characters one by one and try and understand why some of them are defining features while the others are not. Okay, so let's start off with growth itself. You know that growth is universal in living organisms. From the tiniest bacteria to us humans and largest of animals, you see growth happening, right? So growth happens in all living organisms. Now let's take us for example. When we grow, growth can happen because of two reasons. One reason is there is an increase in the size of the cell. A cell was this tiny, it has accumulated more cytoplasm, the volume of cytoplasm has increased and the cell has increased in size. When the cell has increased in size or mass, we say that growth has happened. One reason why growth can happen is because of increase in the size of the cell. Another reason why growth happens is because of a process called cell division. One cell divides to give two cells, those two cells further divide to give you four cells divide to give you 8 cells. The number of cells increasing also will contribute to growth. Okay? Two reasons for growth: increase in the size of the cell, increase in the number of cells. If you look at multicellular organisms, increase in the size of a cell doesn't contribute too much to growth. Of course, it can contribute to growth in us animals and humans. For example, when we put on weight, we become fat. What essentially happens is the adipose cells in our adipose tissue that will accumulate a lot of fat and it will increase in size. So that will contribute to growth. But majorly growth happens because of cell division. Okay, we all started our life as a single celled zygote in the womb of our mothers, right? That one cell gave rise to trillions of cells. How was that possible? That was possible because of cell division. Because if you think about it, a cell cannot, increase in size extremely, right? Why it cannot increase in size extremely, we'll talk about it in another chapter. For now, just understand, you never see a cell that is as big as a human. Cells are usually very small and microscopic. So even if there is an increase in volume happening within the cell, it's not like, it will not affect the size of the organism too much. If the size of the organism is increasing drastically, then most likely it will be because of cell division. So when cell division happens, the number of cells in the body of the organism will increase. Okay, so all living organisms will show growth by cell division. Now what is growth? Growth can be defined as an increase in the mass or size, or it can be thought of as an increase in the number of individuals. Let's consider unicellular organisms. When we say something like amoeba, it's a unicellular organism, or you can consider bacteria, it's unicellular. When we say bacteria or amoeba is showing growth, do we mean the bacteria is increasing in size so much and becoming as tall as us? We don't. what basically happens when bacteria increase in sizes, we are talking about its number. What was one bacteria increases in size considerably, it undergoes cell division and it becomes two. Two bacteria increase in size considerably and then it divides to give rise to 4 cells. So whenever we are talking about cell division, whenever we are talking about growth, two things will happen. One thing is you will see that there is an increase in mass. The second thing is there will be an increase in the number of individuals. So growth has two characters, we call them twin characters. One is increase in mass. Because of the increase in number or size of the cell, mass is increasing. Increase in mass obviously will happen. Along with that, increase in the number of individuals could happen where not in multicellular organisms, it happens in unicellular organisms like amoeba, bacteria and all of that. Okay, I hope this much is clear. Now, how is growth different in unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms is something that we should understand. Let's first talk about what happens in unicellular organisms. In unicellular organisms, growth and reproduction both happen by cell division. Let's take the example of amoeba or bacteria, any unicellular organism. When it undergoes cell division, the number of individuals are increasing. When the number of individuals are increasing, we say it is growing, right? It was one cell initially, it divided, gave rise to 2 cells. Now the number of cells, number of individuals have increased, so that is growth. There was one cell. Now there are 2 cells. That means a new cell has formed. That is equivalent to reproduction, yes or no? What is reproduction? Re means again. Re means repeated. Again it is happening. Production. Again production of what? Something similar to the parent, right? Something similar to the parent amoeba. 2 new daughter amoebae have formed, right? So over there, during cell division, reproduction also has happened. Right? You can say that. It could be asexual reproduction, it could be sexual reproduction, regardless. If from one cell you're getting 2 cells, that means there is an extra member in that population. A new individual has been added which is similar to the parent organism. That is reproduction, right? So when cell division is happening in unicellular organisms, because of cell division, you can see there is an increase in the number of organisms, number of individuals, which is growth. You will also see reproduction happening. So in unicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are mutually inclusive. That is what we say. Inclusive means included. Okay, you may have heard about inclusive of taxes when you buy clothes or something. Sometimes in the tag, inclusive of tax will be written. Sometimes exclusive of tax will be written. If it is inclusive of tax, that means tax is included. You don't have to pay extra money. But if you order from some restaurants on Swiggy, Zomato, or if you go to a restaurant, sometimes whatever is there in the menu card, on top of that, you will have to pay some extra tax, right? Then they will say exclusive of tax. That means additionally, they are 2 separate things. What exclusive means? They are 2 separate things. Inclusive means they are both pretty much the same thing. Okay, so here we say growth and reproduction are synonymous. They are not mutually exclusive. They are not 2 independent events. Both of them are same. Okay, now you consider the same thing for multicellular organisms. Let's take plants for example. Plants show growth throughout their life. That does not mean one tulsi plant will keep growing in height and reach the sky and touch the clouds, right? So when we say plants show unlimited growth or throughout their life they're growing, what we mean is if a leaf falls, a new leaf will form, right? So newer parts, newer organs are growing continuously. At one point you might see that the tree trunk and the branches are completely empty, barren, there are no leaves at all. After a couple of days you will see that the new leaves will form, right? That doesn't apply to us. In me, newer RBCs might be forming, newer cells will be forming in the lining of my epithelial, in the lining of my gut. But if I cut off my hand today, tomorrow new hand will not grow, right? So in that way, in majority of the animals, only up to a certain age we grow. Beyond that, we could grow, but that growth is not similar to the kind of growth we see in plants. In plants, this ability to grow throughout its life is because of a type of tissue called meristematic tissue. The job of this meristematic tissue is to keep dividing throughout all the time. The only thing it does is keep dividing. As it keeps on dividing, the number of cells will be increasing. It will contribute to growth. Okay, more about it we learn in the upcoming chapters. For now, just know in plants you see growth throughout the life. In animals up to a certain age, we do see growth happening. But in us, growth and reproduction are mutually exclusive. What does mutually exclusive mean? It is not the same. I have one cell that has divided to give rise to two cells, let's say in the lining of my gut. A new cell has formed. Does that mean I have grown? Does that mean I'm showing growth? It could mean, okay. So let's say a zygote is one single cell. This zygote underwent division to give rise to two cells in the embryo. Two cells became four cells. So cell division is happening. Is cell division here contributing to growth? Yes, it is contributing to growth. But is it reproduction? It's not reproduction. Just because the number of cells in an organism increased does not mean a new organism is formed. If some cells in child you divided to give rise to adult you have shown growth, but you haven't reproduced. Reproduction happens when another organism similar to you is formed. Whenever cell division is happening, growth will also happen, reproduction also will happen in unicellular organisms, but in multicellular organisms like us, that is not the case. So growth is an entirely different process, reproduction is entirely different. That is why we call it two mutually exclusive processes or events. In unicellular, they are both the same. Because of cell division, it will happen. But in multicellular organisms, they are two entirely different events. Alright? Now, let's move on and learn about how growth happens in living organisms. Remember, I told you that for every attribute or for every character that we're going to discuss, we're going to ask two questions. Is this character applicable to all living organisms is our first question. Secondly, is it applicable to only living organisms is our question. So let's first ask, is it applicable to all living organisms? We already know the answer. All living organisms grow. So the first criterion is fulfilled. The second criterion is, does it happen only in living organisms? Not really. Even in non-living objects or non-living things, non-living structures, you can see growth. What is growth? Growth is basically increase in body mass. We grow. Non-living objects also grow. Not every non-living object can grow, however. I'll give you examples. If you consider a desert, you know that in the desert there'll be a lot of sand dunes. If the velocity of wind is very high, some sand from one area can be moved to another area. Over there it forms a big sand mound. Over there the sand mound is not living, but it has increased in mass, it has increased in size, so it is showing growth. Imagine you've gone on a vacation with your family, with your friends to Himachal Pradesh, Kashmir, somewhere where it is a very snowy mountain. You make a snowball and you roll it down the snowy mountain. As it rolls down the snow, it will pick up more snow and it will become bigger in size, right? Over there is increase in mass, there is increase in size. That means that non-living snow is showing growth. What is snow? Does it have life? No, it's just frozen water, right? So, non-living thing is also showing growth. Okay, so growth is not exclusive only to living organisms. Second criterion is not fulfilled. Growth can be seen in non-living things also. However, there is a major difference between how growth happens in us and how growth happens in non-living things. How does growth happen in us? When we are growing in size, when a little baby grows up to become a toddler, when we grow fat, what exactly happens? When a little baby grows into a toddler, a lot of cell division is happening inside the body, right? Because of something that is happening inside my body, we are growing. When you eat like too much food, much more food than you can burn, all of that extra nutrients is converted to fat and that is stored in your adipose tissue. That is why we put on weight. That is also something that is happening inside the body. So in living organisms, growth happens on the inside. But in non-living things, like I mentioned, it could be mountains, boulders, sand mounds and snowballs, all of these, they also show growth despite being non-living. But that is because something is being added on top of the surface. When we become fat, it's not like somebody is putting tissue or clay or mud on top of our body and we're becoming fat. It's something to do with what is happening inside the body. But in non-living things, whenever growth has happened, that is usually because of things that have accumulated on the surface and contributed to the increase in size or mass. Okay, so that is growth in non-living objects. Over here, we saw that growth happens in all organisms. Yes, growth happens only in living organisms. Not really. So, growth is a characteristic of life, but it is not a defining property of living organisms. Why are we saying it's a characteristic of life? Because if somebody is dead, if there is no life, they do not grow, right? So, growth happens only in, growth is a characteristic feature of life. Okay, that's about the first point. Second one is reproduction. I already briefly told you about reproduction when we spoke about unicellular organisms. Now, what is reproduction? Like you already mentioned, re means repeatedly or again. Production means something is being produced. So, in biology, reproduction is basically organisms, offspring or progeny being produced, and that progeny will be similar to the parents. That process by which the progeny is produced is what we call reproduction. In unicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are used synonymously. Synonymously means, you know what synonyms are, right? Synonyms in general English, like words with the same meaning. That is what we called synonyms in English, in general English, in English grammar. So if here we are saying growth and reproduction are synonymously used, that means in unicellular organisms, both happen because of cell division. So you can use that interchangeably. However, in multicellular organisms, that is not the case. In multicellular organisms, reproduction can happen in two ways. Firstly, it can be asexual or it can be sexual. Asexual reproduction is when formation and fusion of gametes is not involved, newer variations are not produced. Asexual reproduction is when, sexual reproduction is when gametes are formed, gametes are fused, there are newer variations, you see a lot of variation in the population. Whenever asexual reproduction happens, however, the parent will be exactly identical to the parent, the offspring will be there. In sexual reproduction, the offspring will show some difference from the parents. Okay, so more about it we will learn in another unit in 12th grade. There are chapters dedicated for reproduction in plants and animals, specifically humans. We learn more about reproduction there. We learn about reproduction in plant kingdom and animal kingdom. So for now in this chapter, just know these 2 points. Okay, asexual means formation and fusion of gametes is not happening and no variation between the parent and the progeny population. They are genetically identical. In sexual reproduction, formation of gametes, fusion of gametes, very, very important events. Also, along with that, the progeny will differ from the parental generation. Alright, so these are the points that you should know. Asexual reproduction can happen in many ways. If you think about bacteria or certain fungi, asexual reproduction can happen by means of spores. There is a process called budding, which we see in organisms like Hydra and yeast. About budding in yeast, we will learn in the chapter biological classification. About how budding happens in Hydra, you will learn in the chapter animal kingdom, upcoming chapters. I will not get into the details of it. True regeneration is seen in planaria. This also you will learn in Platyhelminthes in animal kingdom. Planaria is a flatworm. You cut it transversely. Each fragment will give rise to a new planaria. Okay, so it's like if you cut yourself in half, the two different organisms will form. Okay, so that doesn't happen in us, of course. Very few organisms have that ability and planaria is one of them. That is called true regeneration. More about regeneration you will learn in animal kingdom chapter. And then we have something called fragmentation. Fragment means what? Fragment means piece, right? So in fragmentation, whenever an organism is cut into many pieces for whatever reason, naturally or you artificially cut it, each fragment or each piece will give rise to a new organism, will act like a new organism. That is called fragmentation, and that can be seen in plants, in fungi, plants meaning algae and mosses in the primitive plants you can see. More about that we will learn in the chapter Plant Kingdom. For now, just remember what all of these are. Okay. So, is reproduction a defining feature? First question, do all organisms reproduce? Do only living organisms reproduce? We have two questions here. Do all organisms reproduce? No, they don't. What are some exceptions? You know about mules, right? When a horse and a donkey mate, as a product of that, an organism called mule is formed. Now, this mule is not further capable of reproducing. That mule is sterile. It is not capable of giving rise to offspring. Does that make mule dead? No. Mule is still living. Just because it's not reproducing, you cannot call it dead, right? So it is still living because it is, showing metabolic activity. It is growing in size. So it is still living, but it is not undergoing reproduction. Another example that we have is of the worker bees. In a honey bee hive, you can see three different categories of bees. Okay. So first you have the queen bee. Then you have the workers. And then you have the drones. Queen and workers are female. Drones are males. Now the drones and queen are fertile. They are capable of reproducing. But these worker bees, they cannot reproduce. They are sterile females. They don't have the ability to reproduce at all. Does that mean they are equal to dead? No, they are still living, right? And another example is infertile human couples. See, of late you may have noticed that there are a lot of couples who choose not to have children. And there are a lot of couples who try to have a child, but they are incapable of having children. Whenever they don't have the ability to have children, we say that they are infertile. Okay. So for whatever reason, by choice or for some reason, they're not able to have children, regardless, just because a person is not reproducing, not giving rise to offspring, doesn't mean they're not alive, right? They're not living. So all living organisms do not reproduce. Therefore, it is not a defining character. Do only living organisms reproduce? Is it possible for non-living things to reproduce? It's impossible, right? This pen, keep it for 500 years, it will not make an extra copy, right? So, only living organisms show reproduction. This point is satisfied, but this is not. Therefore, it is not a defining characteristic of living organism. However, it is a feature. It is not a defining feature. However, it is a characteristic of living organism, because in living organisms, we do see reproduction happening, right? Now, let's talk about cellular organization. All living organisms, be it unicellular or multicellular, are composed of cells and its products, right? If you think about viruses, viruses have certain living properties, they have certain non-living properties. One of the reasons why we call viruses non-living outside the host is because it does not have a proper cellular organization like the other cells. Even bacteria, the simplest kind of cell to exist, it will show some level of organization, like there is a cell wall inside, there's a cytoplasm, there's genetic material, but such organization you do not see in viruses. Okay, so all living organisms, be it prokaryotic, eukaryotic, we all are composed of cells and its products. So we can say that cellular organization is a defining feature of all living organisms. Okay, so what are the two questions that we need to ask? Is it true for all organisms? And is it true only for living organisms? All organisms, cellular organization is there. And this cellular organization you don't see in non-living objects, you see only in living organisms. So, since both of these criteria are fulfilled, you can say that cellular organization is a defining feature of living organisms or life forms as it is given in the textbook. Next, metabolism. I've already told you that metabolism is something that happens in all living organisms from bacteria to us. I told you in today's class itself, in this lecture itself, right now as we speak, as you listen and probably you're making notes, a lot of chemical reactions are happening inside of our body, right? We call them biochemical reactions because it's happening inside of our body. So some molecules are getting made. For example, proteins are being synthesized, glycogen is being synthesized, or in the mitochondria something is getting broken down to release energy. So all of these chemical reactions that are happening inside of our cells is what we call metabolism. So it's the sum of all the chemical reactions that are happening inside of our cells. Okay, so the sum total of all the chemical reactions happening in our body is what we call metabolism. Simultaneously, at the same time, thousands of reactions will be taking place. Within just one cell in a bacteria, food is being digested, energy is being synthesized, respiration is happening. So a lot of chemical reactions occur in living organisms at the same time, that is simultaneously. Okay, so all living organisms do exhibit metabolism. Can non-living things exhibit metabolism? Non-living things cannot exhibit metabolism. Okay, now sometimes you might say there are certain chemical reactions that are happening in our body. For example, synthesis of proteins will happen inside our body, right? Whenever synthesis of proteins happens, amino acids are joined and a long chain of polypeptide is formed inside the ribosome. It requires energy, it requires a lot of enzymes. All of that is taking place inside of our cells. So that is a living reaction. Now, because of advancement in biology, it is possible to synthesize proteins without cells. Cell-free systems are available for the synthesis of proteins. Think about DNA replication. DNA replication naturally happens in living organisms before the cell divides. DNA makes an extra copy. This process happens inside the nucleus. But it's possible to replicate DNA and get more copies in instruments like the PCR, right? So if the PCR is replicating DNA, which generally happens in living organisms, does that make the PCR instrument, the PCR machine living? Not really. In our cells, whenever carbon dioxide is being transported by blood, you know that carbon dioxide combines with water to form carbonic acid. This reaction can easily be replicated in a test tube. Does that make the test tube living? Not really. The test tube or the PCR instrument are non-living things in which living reactions are being replicated, in which in vitro living reactions are taking place. In vitro means not within the body. In vitro means outside the living body in laboratory conditions. Okay, just because a living reaction is happening outside a living organism, that does not make that object or that instrument living, right? So metabolic reactions can be demonstrated outside the body in cell-free systems without the cells, that is in vitro, right? In vitro means it is happening outside the body in laboratory conditions. So such metabolic reactions can be performed in test tube. You cannot call the test tube living or non-living, right? So we can say, since these metabolic reactions happen in living organisms, in all living organisms from prokaryotes to the most advanced plants and animals, and this cannot happen without human interference, without human intervention in non-living things, it cannot happen. So we can say that this satisfies both the properties. As a result, metabolism can be considered as the defining feature of living organisms. I hope that is clear. Last point, consciousness. What is consciousness? In your textbook, it is given that consciousness is the most obvious but technically complicated feature of all living organisms. What is that? We have the ability to sense our surroundings and respond to our surroundings. This is something only living organisms have. Non-living things don't have this. So automatically that will make it the defining property of living organisms. How do advanced animals like us sense our surroundings? We have sensory structures. If I mean, with the help of my eyes, I can see and be aware of what is around me. There's a camera right in front of me. There's a window to this side. There is a board to this side. On top of me, there is a fan. Over here, there is an AC. I know all of it because of my sense organs, because of my eyes. I can sense the temperature. Is it cold? Is it hot? Because of my skin. I can taste different things. And I can smell different odors. All of this is possible because of my sense organs. These sense organs are what make me aware of our surroundings. And whenever there is a threat, I have the ability to respond to it as well. This may seem very obvious in animals, but in plants also, despite lacking elaborate sense organs, they still can be aware of their surroundings and respond to it. Let's take the example of a very pretty plant, the touch me not plant. The moment you touch it, all of its leaflets will close shut, right? It does not have eyes. How does it know? Because of tactile sensation, because when somebody touches, it will close. You all may have performed this experiment in school where you have a potted plant, you keep a dabba cardboard box on top of it, cut a hole on one side. Through the hole, the plant will start growing out. How is that possible? Because it is sensing light, it is moving towards light. Roots always move towards the soil, gravitropism. So, or geotropism you can call it. And also, you know, plants have the ability to sense how much duration of light they are getting, how much duration of darkness they are getting, what is the temperature in its ambient surrounding. They can detect all of that despite lacking sensory structures. So the leaf itself will do most of the sensing and it will send signals and information to the other parts of the plant. In fact, leaves can sense the duration of daylight, the temperature, whether it's hot or cold, and according to that, it will send signals to the plant to produce flowers. So flowering depends on a lot of things. So plants might come across as stupid things that does not have brain, they're brainless, they cannot think, but still they're very smart, right? So it is even seen in unicellular organisms like Euglena. If you know, Euglena has chloroplast, so it can photosynthesize. It has a flagellum. So apparently in the Euglena, there is a region which can detect where sunlight is available, where light is available for photosynthesis, and the flagella will take the organism towards the source of sunlight. So all of these are structures or things that help living organisms be aware of their surroundings and respond accordingly, right? So consciousness is a defining feature of all living organisms, the smallest bacteria to us. If you think about bacteria will interact with its environment. If it knows that there's glucose present around it, it will take it up into the cell, right? So that way it is interacting with the environment constantly. Now, there is a concept of self-consciousness. What is self-consciousness? Self-consciousness is we being aware of ourselves. This self-consciousness is present only in humans, not in other organisms. Okay? Human being is the only organism that is aware of himself or has self-consciousness. We are people who think about ourselves. You know if you've wasted too much time and not studied today. You know if you've disrespected somebody. You care about your future, so you think about your future. You worrying about what you said in an argument 3 weeks ago. So these are this awareness that we have about ourselves, what people will say if you fail. All of this is something that only humans have. Other organisms lack that self-consciousness. All they care about is survival. Did I eat today? Do I have a safe place? Shelter? Can I find a mate to reproduce? These are the only things that other organisms care about. But for us, we have self-consciousness, which makes us different from the other organisms in the living world, right? So if you were asked a question, if consciousness is a defining feature of living organisms, your answer will be yes. In all living organisms, consciousness is seen. Is self-consciousness a defining feature of living organisms? Not really. It is seen only in human beings and no other organism displays self-consciousness. Alright? And I think there is a question in your NCERT textbook asking if a person is in coma, then is he alive or dead? What is the thing? Generally, when a person is in coma, some level of brain activity will still be seen. They may not be able to respond to your sound or touch or whatever, but some amount of brain activity will still be seen and they can be brought back to life with the proper treatment. So you can't call them dead. Okay? Now we've studied about 5 features: growth, reproduction, cellular organization, metabolism and consciousness. Of these 5 features, there are 3 that are the defining features which have satisfied both criteria. One is all living organisms show that feature, display that characteristic, and that characteristic is seen only in living organisms and not in non-living objects. Okay, so cellular organization, metabolism and consciousness. Remember, consciousness is a defining feature, not self-consciousness. Alright, so now that we know about it, how can you think about living? How would you define the phenomenon of living? Every living phenomena happens due to underlying interactions. Now, what does that mean? Let's try to break it down. There are many levels in biological organization, right? Let's start off with the macromolecules. There are many different types of macromolecules, like your carbohydrates, or let me just say biomolecules. These biomolecules come together in different ways and give rise to cell organelles. These cell organelles will give rise to cells. From cells, you have tissues. From tissues, you have organs. From organs, you have organ system, and so on. Right? These are the different levels in biological organization. How did a cell organelle come into being? How was a mitochondrion formed? For the formation of mitochondria, you require different chemicals. You require phospholipids in the membrane, you require proteins in the membrane, you require certain cholesterol molecule, you require certain carbohydrates probably. So different molecules are coming together and interacting. Because of the interaction of these biomolecules, a cell organelle is forming. Whatever properties mitochondria has, those properties you don't find in the biomolecules. So whatever properties you're seeing in the cell organelle in this level, that is a result of interaction happening at the previous level. Now you have several different types of cell organelles. You have chloroplast, mitochondria, ER, Golgi, lysosomes and all of that. Each one will have its own characteristic feature and function. Whatever properties a cell will show, that property a cell organelle cannot show. Why does the cell have the ability to show that property, a particular property? Why is the cell the way it is? It is because of the interaction happening at the previous lower level. Because these cell organelles are interacting with each other, because of that underlying interaction, cell has a certain property. Because cells interact a certain way, the tissues will have certain properties. Right? If a heart muscle, the cardiac muscle in the heart has to beat at once, then the cells in the heart muscle are interacting with each other. Because of the cells interacting, the heart is able to beat as a whole. Right? Because of different tissues interacting, organs will have its property. I hope you're getting my point. So basically, properties of tissues are not present in the cells. How do those properties arise then? It arises because of interactions happening within the cells. Whatever organelles have properties, they are not present in its molecular constituents. Why do cell organelles have certain properties? Because of interactions happening in the biomolecules. Okay? So whatever interactions are happening here, this will result in some property in the next level, in the next higher level of organization. The interactions result in emergent properties. Newer properties will emerge at higher level of organization. So how can you define a living organism now? A living organism is self-replicating. It can make more copies of itself. It can reproduce. Constantly evolving. We will not be the same throughout life. Just like how apes gave rise to humans, evolution is a continuous process that is happening all the time. We are constantly evolving and self-regulating interactive systems. There's a lot of interaction happening. There is a lot of self-regulation happening. More about it you will learn in zoology chapters, how our body temperature is regulated, how osmotic balance is maintained, regulation happens within the organism itself. That is self-regulation. No external switch is required. Within the body, the organism itself is capable of regulating itself, right? And interactive systems that are capable of responding to external stimuli. That is how we would define a living organism. We have the ability to reproduce, self-replicate, make more copies of ourselves, not necessarily copies, but give rise to more offspring of similar kind. We are constantly evolving. There is a lot of interaction, chemical interaction and interactions happening at various levels, and we are also self-regulating organisms that are capable of detecting external stimuli and responding to it accordingly, right? That is how we can define living, okay? All right. So the first part of the chapter I told you is what is living. We've finished that. The next part we talk about the diversity in the living world, okay? So what does diversity mean? Diversity means variety, right? You've heard of diversity when we talk about unity and diversity in India. We say that India has a lot of variety with respect to food, culture, language, but regardless of it all, we all are united, right? So diversity means variety. We see a lot of variety in living organisms, and the variety that we see in living organisms is called biodiversity. If you consider our planet, there is a lot of variety of so many different organisms that you can see. Thousands and millions of varieties of plants and animals and microbes is something we can see, right? So at this point, I want you to understand that every different type of organism that you're looking at represents one species. Tulsi plant, Tulsi is one species, mango is one species, jasmine is one species, a type of moss is one species, tiger is a species, lion is a species, we are a species. So every different kind of plant or animal or microbe that you're looking at represents something that we call a species. There are millions of species present on our world. Not millions of organisms, millions of different types of organisms. So according to how much ever research has happened so far, according to whatever discovery has happened so far, we can say that around 1.7 to 1.8 million species have been discovered and described up until this point. 1.7 to 1.8 million is 17 lakh to 18 lakh different types of species, different species that are found on our planet, okay? So, like I already mentioned, we call this the biodiversity, the variety that we see in living organisms. This is not the total number of species that exists on Earth. This is the number that we have discovered and described so far. There could be so many species very deep inside the forest that we have not been able to explore and describe and identify. There could be so many thousands and millions of species that are very deep underwater which we are not even aware of. So, if you include all of that, the number of species would be even much more. Okay, there's a chapter in 12th grade called Biodiversity and Conservation about which, in which we will learn a lot more about biodiversity. But for this chapter, let's just understand what biodiversity means, and on an average, approximately how many species have been discovered and described so far. Okay, so if you read news articles, science articles, if you have a habit of that, you may have noticed that sometimes there will be articles that are published which say in Western Ghats a new species of amphibian was discovered, somewhere near the Himalayas a new species of fern was discovered. So it is there. The number is much higher than this number, but it has not yet been discovered. Newer species are getting discovered on a daily basis, and this number is only going to increase, right? So we all name living organisms, right? Generally, we name living organisms based on its use for us, based on its attributes, and in different parts of the world, the same organism can be called by different names, right? So we have a particular name for rose in Kannada, we call it gulabi, or you can call it roja. I think in Hindi, they will have a different name. In Telugu, Tamil, they might have a different name. In Konkani, there might be a different name. In Japanese, there might be a different name. So across the world, the same organism, it's possible for the same organism to have many different local names. Okay? Also, it is possible for two different organisms to be called by the same name. Two different species can have the same local name or vernacular name. In Kannada, we call elephant Aane. In English, it's elephant. In Hindi, it's Hathi, I think. And in other languages, it could be different. Right? I hope you're getting my point. The same species will be called by different names in different part of the world according to the region. According to the local language, the name for the same species will differ from one place to another. In the scientific community, this can create or lead to a lot of confusion. Let's say that there are two scientists, researchers trying to develop a cure for cancer. They have chanced upon some chemical, some drug that is found in a particular plant. Okay. I am that researcher. I am working on this plant and I am from India. There is a person, Shizuka, from Japan, who is also working on the same plant. I have some findings from my research. She has some findings. Cancer is a deadly disease that is taking so many lives across the planet. If we both know that we are talking about the same plant, we're working on the same plant, if we can collaborate, we can arrive at a conclusion, arrive at a drug that can potentially save cancer patient lives sooner. But if I'm calling it plant X and she's calling it plant W, then we don't even know that we're working on the same plant, right? We can't collaborate that way and make our research better. So normal people might not find any problem with giving one species 100 different names, but in the scientific community, it can create confusion. It can create a delay in obtaining results because of lack of coordination, right? So what they decided to do was standardize the naming. Scientifically, name one species in a certain way, give one species just one name, and that one name itself has to be universal. Across the globe, in the scientific community, that one particular species is known just by that one name. This avoids a lot of confusion and it makes it easier for collaborations as well. Okay? So, it is in order to avoid confusion, there is a need for naming to be standardized. And that particular organism which is called by one name only has to be followed all over the world. This naming of the organism is called nomenclature. Okay. Now, giving an organism a name is only possible whenever that organism is correctly described. Now, I'm looking at an animal for the first time. I have to find out its name. I will look at certain books where there is description of each animal. This animal has a very big tummy, it has pillar-like legs, it has a long trunk, it could have tusks. If this is the description, then I will know I'm looking at an elephant. If that organism is not correctly described, characterization has not happened, then identification of that organism, giving it a name will become difficult. Okay. So for an organism to be identified and named correctly, that can be possible only when the organism is described correctly. Only when it is described correctly, I can identify that organism with that particular name, right? Nomenclature is like Namkarana. We call it Namkarana in Karnataka, where when a baby is newly born, you give it a name, right? Whenever you're naming a baby, there are a couple of rules that we follow. Like you have to look at what time the baby was born, what was the nakshatra at that time, what is the rashi of the baby, and all of that you check. And then the priest will give you a couple of letters, and from those letters you will have to name the baby. Traditionally, if you do it, right? And then from those letters you have to check for a couple of names, and then you have to find out whether the meaning of the name is good. And based on all of these rules, we give names to babies. Of course, even in the other religions, there will be some or the other such rituals or rules before you name a child, before you name a baby, right? Similar to how we have a couple of rules to give names to human babies, there are a couple of rules that govern the naming of living organisms scientifically. Okay, so who decides these rules? These rules are decided by scientists across the world. They have established certain procedures. By making use of those procedures, you can give living organisms names. Just because I discovered a plant, I cannot call it Shalini. Just because I identified it, I cannot call it my name. I have to follow a couple of rules that are decided by certain committees, certain bodies like the ICBN and ICZN. It's important for you to remember what ICBN stands for and what ICZN stands for. ICBN is International Code for Botanical Nomenclature. This sets the rules and governs the naming or nomenclature of plants. Botanical means you must understand it's about plants, right? Similarly, ICZN is International Code for Zoological Nomenclature, and this governs and sets the rules for naming animals. Alright, now what are these rules? The kind of naming that we use scientifically for living organisms is called binomial nomenclature. I told you nomenclature already means naming, right? Binomial means what? Bi means what? Bi means two. In binomial nomenclature, every name will have two words. Similar to how we have a main name and a surname. I am Shalini Somashekar. I have two words in my name. Like there is Virat Kohli, there are two words in his name, right? Similar to how we have a first name and a second name or the surname. Every living organism that is named scientifically must have two words. It's not two names. It is one single name known by that one name throughout the world. But that single name should carry two words. Alright. Because it has two words, we call it binomial nomenclature. This was first proposed by Carolus Linnaeus, who is also called the father of taxonomy. I told you that in binomial nomenclature, there are two words in each name. The first word is called the generic name and the second word is called the specific epithet. The first one is the generic name and the second one is the specific epithet. In your lower grades, you may have learnt it as genus name and species name. Now, you will learn it as generic name and specific epithet. What are the rules that are governing the naming of living organisms? We have to understand. Generally, these names are derived directly from Latin, or if you are using it from some other language, then you will have to Latinize it. Now you might have a question, why is it that we're using Latin? Why can't I use Kannada? Why can't I use Malayalam? Why can't I use Rajasthani language? Why Latin? Why not some other language? The reason we use Latin language is because Latin is a dead language. What does dead language mean? No people on earth no longer communicate in Latin. It is not a spoken language in any part of the world. If you see Indian languages like that, very few people speak Sanskrita, right? It is also an almost dead language where not a lot of people converse in that language. Why does a language have to be dead for it to be used in binomial nomenclature? If a language is constantly being used, it will evolve with time. The words will change, right? If you noticed how English was in Shakespeare dramas and literature in older English, there are words like thy, thou, which we don't use currently, right? There are certain words that we newly have, invented and we use it, right? Over the period of time, as people communicate in a language, that language will also start undergoing some changes. In Kannada, the Hadagannada, the older Kannada that we used to use is very different from the current conversational Kannada that we use. Any language for that matter will change with time as people use it, right? If nobody is using that language is not bound to change at all. Whatever name you've kept today, the same name will be as it is 10 years later, 20 years later, 100 years later, because that language is not changing. That is the reason why Latin was chosen as the language for binomial nomenclature. Now, in order to, represent or signify that word is derived from Latin, whenever it is printed, it is italicized. You know what is italicized? Italicized is It has to be printed in italics. You know, italics is like the slant font, which is like a little bit like cursive writing. So whenever you're printing scientific names, it has to be in italics. If you are writing it, if it is handwritten, then you have to write the two words separately and underline the two words separately. When you underline it separately, it is understood that it is a scientific name. Okay? Now, the first word is called the generic name. The first letter of the generic name always has to start with a capital letter. The first letter of the specific epithet will always start with a lowercase. For example, the scientific name of mango is Mangifera indica. So I will write it like this. This is the generic name. Okay? It is starting with a capital letter. Indica is the specific epithet. It is starting with a lowercase. Since it is handwritten, I will underline it separately. The person who first described it, that taxonomist name also can be written as a third word. For example, this was first described by Linnaeus. So I will write Linnaeus' name as an abbreviation. So the name of the author can appear after the specific epithet, however, it's not mandatory. Does that mean before Linnaeus saw the mango tree, nobody knew about it? Not really. Mango tree existed since several thousands of years, but Linnaeus was the first person to write and list down its characters and, you know, describe it and give it a scientific name. That's why we're writing his name. He's not the first person to have discovered a mango tree. Okay, other people have discovered mango tree in the tropical region. They've consumed mango fruits for several thousands of years. But he is the first person to have scientifically described it and given it a scientific name. Alright, now, yeah, that's about nomenclature. Now we have to talk about classification. See, there are 1.7 to 1.8 million species that have been discovered so far. If you have to study different organisms, if it is classified properly, it will make studies easier. Imagine a library, your school library, for example. In your school library, you will have books of different categories, books of different languages. Imagine if there was no structure or order in the arrangement of these books and there was a random pile of books and you want to pick up some fantasy novel from that. You would have no idea how to find it and it would create a lot of confusion and waste of time in order to look for that book. So if you want to, pick up something quickly, it has to be organized. Unless it is organized, you will not get access to it very quickly. Same thing happens even in living organisms. Different people are studying about different organisms. Imagine, like I told you, I'm studying about one plant that has a chemical that can potentially cure cancer. But this plant is not found very easily around different parts of the world. And this plant is not easy to grow. Okay, so it will grow very well only in one small region in India, in Karnataka, let's say. Okay, but cancer patients are present around the world. If I want to, use this chemical to treat cancer, I want to check if this chemical can be present in other plants also. What is the likelihood of this chemical being present in other plants? Its close relatives will have the same genes, right? Same chemical producing genes. For example, us and great apes are more closely related than a dog. What chemicals my body has, similar chemicals might be present in a chimpanzee compared to a dog. That makes me and a chimp and a gorilla evolutionarily closely related, right? So if I'm looking at a plant that has some chemical which has potential cure for cancer, that is not easily available throughout the world, it's not easy to grow also. I want to search for a similar chemical with a similar activity. I should know for sure which are its cousins, which are its close relatives, so I can check those plants if a similar chemical can be found. For that, the plants have to be classified properly. I should know which plants are its cousins so that I can go look for it, right? So classification becomes very important. So classification has to be done even in living organisms. Otherwise, imagine 1.8 lakh species of organisms are there and there's no classification. Studies becomes extremely complicated. So classification has to be done. What is classification? Classification is basically arrangement. How are we arranging? We are arranging based on certain easily observable characters. Whenever there are similarities, more similarities, you put that into one group. Whenever there is a lot of dissimilarity, you separate them into two groups. That is what we do in classification, right? So classification is a process by which anything, it could be books, it could be living organisms. Classification is a general English term. So something is being grouped into convenient categories. How are we grouping them? Based on the similarities and dissimilarities that are easily observable. When it comes to living organisms, we can look at its morphological features, anatomical features, and all of that. Okay. Now, in order to understand classification better, I will give you the example of your school library. For example, if you look at the library, if you've ever been to a library, you would know that there will be several sections for different kinds of books. Classification would have happened at multiple levels, right? In the first level, let's say, books are classified based on the language. There is one rack, one shelf where you have all Kannada books, one shelf where you have all English books, and one shelf where you have all Hindi books. So this is the first level of classification based on the language. Now let's look at English books. Within the English book shelf, you will have further many rows containing different types of books. Some rows might contain academic or study related books, where you can find your textbooks, your PYQ books, your reference material, and those kind of things. And another section you will find non-academic books, not related to your studies. If you look at non-academic section, you will find a lot of, you could find probably autobiographies of certain people. You can find a lot of, fictional books that are not really true. I mean, it's not real, but fictional books. So if you look under the fictional books, you can find science fiction, you can find fantasy novels. So a lot of levels of classification will happen. First language, then depending upon academic, non-academic. If it's non-academic, then what? Is it autobiography or fiction? If it is fiction, then what? Science fiction, fantasy, horror, what is it? So classification will happen at different levels. Even when living organisms are being classified, you can't just use one character and classify all the living organisms. Classification, even in living organisms, will happen across different levels. Okay, so today we will learn about those levels. Just like you had different criteria and different levels for classification of books in library, I told you will have different categories and different levels in grouping living organisms. Each level or each category there scientifically is called the taxa. Taxon is singular. Taxa is plural. The process by which this taxonomy, this classification is done is what we call taxonomy. When we are classing living organisms, what are some of the characters or criteria that we might use? External and internal structure. Externally, with the naked eye, how it is appearing. Cut it open and look at its inside, how it is appearing. Based on its morphology and anatomy, you can classify different organisms. Does it have a taproot system? Then it is dicot. Does it have fibrous root system morphologically? Then it is monocot. Okay, so that way you can classify. And again, you can look at its anatomy, look at its inside, whether it has a coelom, true coelom, false coelom. Then based on that you can classify animals. So morphologically, anatomically, those criteria can be used for classification. Structure of a cell. Whether the cell is prokaryotic or eukaryotic. How does the development happen? What kind of environment does it stay in? Ecologically, its environment, how is it? What is its role in that environment? So based on all of these features, classification is possible. In taxonomy, there are certain important processes such as characterization, identification, classification, and nomenclature. Characterization, I told you, is like the description, proper description of that living organism. Based on the description, you can identify that plant with a specific scientific name. Giving names is nomenclature, right? So all of these are different processes that are basic to taxonomy. We have another term called systematics. Now, systematics is derived from a Latin word called systema. This word was used by Carl Linnaeus in his book Systema Naturae. Systema basically means systematic arrangement. In this case, it is systematic arrangement of living organisms. So Systema Naturae is very much like taxonomy. It also includes identification, nomenclature, classification, characterization and all of that. But along with that, additionally, it will also take into account evolutionary relationships. Then we call it systematics. Evolutionary relationships play a very important role. In the chapter evolution, when you study in 12th grade, you will realize that when two organisms are looking very similar, that does not mean they are closely related. Sometimes very distantly related organisms can, look alike, and sometimes very closely related organisms can look very different from each other. So if you see a dolphin and a shark might appear similar because they are living in the water, but dolphin is not closely related to shark. Dolphin is more closely related to us because we all are mammals. So evolutionary relationship plays an important role in classification that will kind of make classification a lot easier if you are considering evolutionary relationship. Okay, now let's talk about the different taxonomic categories. There are 7 different taxonomic categories, major 7 different taxonomic categories. Each one is called a taxon. Together, all of these are taxa. Each one is a taxonomic category. Together, all of this is called the taxonomic hierarchy. Okay, so there is a specific, sequence in which you will have to remember the taxonomic categories. I will give you a mnemonic that will help you remember this very easily. The mnemonic is keep plates clean or family gets sick. Okay? Look at these categories. We'll start from here. Keep for kingdom, K and K. Plates, phylum. If it's animals, we call it phylum. If it's plants, we call it division. Keep plates clean, class, or order, family, gets, genus, sick, species. Over here, kingdom is considered to be the highest category. Kingdom is the highest category. Species obviously is the lowest category. In your exams, competitive exams, they might ask you to identify the correct sequence of the taxonomic categories in ascending order or descending order. So everybody would know keep plates clean or family get sick, that order. If they ask for ascending order, what is ascending order? Smallest to largest. So if it is asked in the ascending order, then you will go from species to kingdom. Species to kingdom is ascending. Ascending. If they ask you for descending, it's highest to lowest category. It is kingdom to species. That would be descending. Remember, kingdom, phylum or division, class, order, family, genus, species. This is the order. This is the descending order. Opposite of it will be the ascending order of the taxonomic categories. Now we have to learn about each of these taxonomic categories. Okay, so we'll start off with the lowest category, which is species. Now, what is species? It is a group of individuals. I already explained to you what species is, how it is defined when I told you about Ernst Mayr and the biological concept of species and all that, right? So what is a species? Species basically is a group of individuals that are capable of interbreeding and giving rise to fertile offspring. But over here in this part, in NCERT, species is defined as a group of individuals with fundamental similarities. So There will be a lot of similarities within the same species. The anatomical structure will be very similar. The morphological features will be very similar. So a lot of fundamental similarities will exist. Based on these features, one will be easily able to distinguish between two different species. Okay, one should be able to distinguish one species from the other closely related species based on the distinct morphological differences they've given here. But actually, when you think about it, just by morphological differences, you may not be able to classify species or distinguish species properly. Take the example of a German Shepherd dog and a wolf and a pug. Now, a German Shepherd dog and a pug look very different from each other morphologically, right? But if you compare a German Shepherd with a wolf, they look more similar, right? There are some breeds of dogs, like I can't remember the breeds, but they look a lot more wolves than a pug. But still, though there are a lot of morphological similarities, you still don't classify them within the same species because of the same reason again. If they interbreed, they will not be able to produce a fertile offspring. So the more right way of defining species would be according to Ernst Mayer's definition, which is species is a group of organisms that are capable of interbreeding and producing fertile offspring. Now, there are many different species. In NCERT, they have given us the example of mango, potato and lion as three different species. Mango scientifically is called Mangifera indica. Potato is called Solanum tuberosum. Lion is called Panthera leo. Each one represents one species. Within a scientific name, there will be two words, you know. The first word is the generic name and the second word is the specific epithet. Over here, indica, tuberosum and leo. These are the specific epithets. Mangifera, Solanum and Panthera, these are the generic names. Generic names means they are representing the next level in the taxonomical categories. We are talking about species. Mangifera indica is species. The specific epithet is indica. What is Mangifera? Mangifera is the generic name which is the next level in classification. So, it represents this category which is genus. Okay. So, Mangifera, Solanum, Panthera, all of these are genera. They represent the higher taxa after species which is nothing but the genus. Okay. So, mango is Mangifera indica, potato is Solanum tuberosum. It's not visible there, but it will be there in your notes. Lion is Panthera leo. Each one is a different species. Now, two different species might have the same generic name. Solanum tuberosum is potato scientific name. Solanum melongena is brinjals or eggplants scientific name. If you notice here, both Solanum in potato, and this is not potato, this is brinjal. Just let me change it. 1 minute. Okay. Yeah. So this is brinjal. Both of them have the same generic name, but the specific epithet is different. So, both of them belong to the same genus. If the genus name or the generic name is the same, it indicates that these two organisms are very closely related and they belong to the same genus. Okay. So, each genus, every genus can have more than one specific epithet. If the same genus has a different specific epithet, it means that these two are two entirely different species. But the fact that they both have the same generic name indicates that they both are very closely related. Okay. Now, Panthera leo and Panthera tigris. This is the scientific name of lion and tiger respectively. If you notice even over here, the generic name is the same. It is Panthera in both cases. That means both these organisms are very closely related. Both these species are very closely related. That is why it has a common genus name. It belongs to the same genus. Remember, species is one group. Similar species will be grouped under one common genus. Now, this is a separate species, this is a separate species. Both of them are grouped in the same genus because they have a lot of similarities. Because they are grouped in the same genus, they have a common same generic name which is Panthera. Now, if you compare, if you see for humans, Our scientific name is Homo sapiens. Homo is the generic name and species is the, sapiens is the specific epithet. Currently, the only genus of, the only species having genus Homo is Homo sapiens. But earlier, you had Homo habilis, you had Homo erectus, other species were there, but they are now extinct. Currently, for this particular genus, there is only one species. But several genera like Solanum and Panthera, it is possible for one genus to have more than one species. Okay. Now, let's talk about genus. Genus is a group of species that are closely related. Okay. For example, consider lion, tiger and leopard. Lion is Panthera leo, tiger is Panthera tigris, leopard is Panthera pardus. Okay. All of these are big cats, all of them have a lot of similarities, but each one is different. If they interbreed, they will not produce fertile offspring. So each one is a different species. Now, though each one is a different species, because they have a lot of similarities, they are grouped in the same genus. That is why they have a common genus name or the generic name, which is Panthera. Read this statement very carefully. This is a line from NCERT. Okay. A group of related species which have more characters in common in comparison with species of other genera. When you are considering a genus, you may have many species in it. Now, when you compare two species belonging to the same genera or one species belonging to one genera and one species belonging to a different genus, then more similarities will be seen in species belonging to the same genera. For example, all you're looking at here are cats. These are the big wild cats. This is the small domestic cat. They all will have similarities. Now compare leopard with another big cat having the same genus name. The similarities here are more. That is what this means. More characters are in common between these two. When you compare that with another species belonging to a different genera. If you're comparing leopard with tiger, similarities is more because they belong to the same genus. That's why they belong to the same genus. If you compare a leopard with a domestic cat, similarities are there, but compared to these two, in these two similarities are less. Because there are fewer similarities, they are grouped under two different genera. This is Panthera, this is Felis. Okay, are you getting my point? I hope you are. Now, I already told you Solanum tuberosum, Solanum melongena, both of them are two different species of plants belonging to the same genus, so they are very closely related to each other. Species over, genus over, next category is family. Groups, closely related genera are grouped under the same family. Whichever genera share some common characters, that is grouped under the common family. Okay, over here let's take the example. Solanum is one genus. Within Solanum you have many species. Okay, this Solanum genus, Petunia genus, Datura genus, all three genera have some similar common characteristic features. Because of those similarities, all these three are grouped under the same family called Solanaceae. Solanaceae is a plant family. Now, when you are defining a family, you will say that within a family, you will have related genera. Understand here, it has related genera with still less number of similarities as compared to genus and species. What does this mean now? Look at species. If you look at species, let's take tiger for example. Tiger, within the species if you're looking, all you have is tigers, right? If you're comparing one tiger with another tiger within the same species, maximum number of similarities you will find. Now let's move to genus level. Tiger is also belonging to Panthera, lion is also belonging to Panthera. Now you're comparing these two belonging to same genera but two different species. We are going one step ahead. At the generic level we are looking. Over here you do see similarities. but the similarities or common characters is less than within the species. If you compare two lions, similarity is maximum. Compare two tigers within the same species, similarity is maximum. Now when you're coming at the generic level and comparing a tiger with a lion, similarities exist but comparatively less. Move one step ahead. Compare lion with a cat, two entirely different genera. Then the similarities are even less, right? So what we basically understand from here is, as you move from the species level to the higher categories, similarities will go on reducing. Okay? Now if you look at this very example, within the same family, you have Datura, Petunia, Solanum. Two Solanum, Melongena, two brinjal plants will have highest similarity. Brinjal and potato will have next level highest similarity. But a brinjal and a petunia plant will have even less similarities. So as you're going up different categories in the taxonomic hierarchy, the similarities will go on reducing. Okay. Now, here is the example. Panthera pardus, Panthera leo, Panthera tigris, leopard, lion and tiger along with cat, Felis domestica, are grouped under the same family, that is called Felidae. Similarly, dogs and wolves are grouped under the same family called Canidae. Okay. So here if you notice, comparison between this and this, highest similarity, compare this with another genus, similarity is less. Comparison between Panthera pardus and Panthera pardus and wolf, it is even less. So as you keep going up the taxonomic category, similarities will be lesser and lesser. What is the next taxonomic category? It is the order. Order is the assemblage of families. Over here, these orders will have a few similar characters. For example, there are plant families like Convolvulaceae, Solanaceae, which are grouped under the same order called polynomials. Now, these generally, as you move ahead in plants, while grouping orders, they will basically, in the most cases, consider only floral characters. If you think about animals, you have two different families here, Felidae and Canidae. Felidae and Canidae are grouped within the same order called Carnivora. Okay. So, in order Carnivora, you have all of these organisms. Now, compare the similarity between a wolf and tiger, it is even less, right? Next, we have class. In class, you will have related orders. Again, the similarity will be much less. There is an order called Primata, which includes us, it includes gibbons, it includes chimps and gorillas. There is also an order that we just learnt about, order Carnivora, which includes big cats, small cats, dogs and wolves. Us, order Primata and order Carnivora are grouped under a common class called Mammalia. Mammalia includes many other orders as well. Okay. So the common characteristic that will include all these organisms in group Mammalia is the ability to give birth to young ones, and also females will have mammary glands to nourish the young ones. Okay, based on that one feature, you can classify these organisms into class Mammalia. Okay, and yeah, you have order Primata, these organisms, Carnivora, these organisms grouped under the same class Mammalia. Next is phylum or division. If it is animals, we call it phylum. If it is plants, we call it division. There are many classes such as fishes. Fishes is a superclass. Then you have, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals. These all are different classes. All of these classes are grouped under a common phylum that is called Chordata. Okay, so that is based on the presence of notochord, a dorsal, ventral nerve cord, no? Yeah, so those things you will learn about in animal kingdom. So all of these are different classes which are grouped under the same phylum. Likewise, in plants, you have different classes such as with fewer similarities that will be grouped under a common division. Okay, so the next highest category will be kingdom. Kingdom, there are two kingdoms. There are 5 kingdoms actually. But here, since we're talking about plants and animals, there are 2 kingdoms. One is plant kingdom and the other is animal kingdom. Plant kingdom is also called kingdom Plantae, and animal kingdom is also called kingdom Animalia. So within this kingdom, several phyla are present. Porifera, Coelenterata, all of these, Chordata, Echinodermata, all of these are different phyla. They are all grouped under kingdom Animalia. Algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, angiosperms, these are various divisions. They are all grouped under kingdom Plantae. Okay, so that's about it. Now, about taxonomic categories, I want you to understand 2 things. As you move from the species level to the kingdom level, how many common characters are there that will go on decreasing? Within the same species, highest similarity. As you keep moving up, the similarities will be lesser and lesser. As you move from species to kingdom, the number of organisms will increase. Okay, in species, if you're considering only one species, how many organisms are there in that species? Only that is included, right? If you talk about tigers, what is the population of tigers? Only that number is included. Consider the genus level. You will include leopard and lion and tiger and panther and all of these belonging to genus Panthera. So their number will be more. Include carnivora or include Felidae family. You're including the cats as well. Include carnivora, you're including the dogs and wolves as well. So as you go up the taxonomic category, the number of organisms or the number of individuals will go on increasing. But as you move from the species level to the kingdom level, the number of common characteristics between individuals belonging to that taxa will go on decreasing. Okay? Yeah. So whatever we studied so far, its classification I've given in the form of a table for your easy understanding. Questions might be asked from this data. Okay, so we spoke about Solanum tuberosum, Solanum nigrum, Solanum melongena. All of them belong to the same genus Solanum. It belongs to the same family Solanaceae. Solanaceae along with Convolvulaceae is added in the same family, which is added in the same order, which we call polynomials. That is dicotyledonous, that is class. It belongs to division Angiosperm, so we call it Angiospermae. Ultimately, it belongs to kingdom Plantae, right? And similarly, this is the table that I have made for animals. We spoke about so many different animals, its common name and biological name, its genus, family, order. The details of all of that is available to you in this one single table. So that will make it easier for your revision and study. Okay, this will be available to you in your notes. Okay, so common name. Wherever it is mentioned in the book, I have given the scientific name. For dog, monkey, gorilla, gibbon, wolf, they have not mentioned the scientific name, so I've left it out. Okay, it is not part of your NCERT syllabus. We will not study its scientific names. Okay, now finally there is one table given at the end of the book, taxonomic categories of different organisms. There are 4 you have to study about, 2 plants and 2 animals. The 2 plants are, one is wheat, one is mango. The 2 animals are housefly and man. Why am I writing in reverse? About humans, it's very easy. You know we are called Homo sapiens. Scientific name, genus is Homo. Family is Hominidae. Order, you already know, we studied it before, Primata. Class is Mammalia. Phylum is Chordata. Kingdom is Animalia. You know that. For housefly, it's Musca domestica. Musca is the genus name. Muscidae is the family. Order is Diptera. Class is Insecta. Phylum is Arthropoda. Kingdom is Animalia. Mango, Mangifera indica, Mangifera, Anacardiaceae, Sapindales. It's a dicot plant. It's a flower producing plant, fruit producing plant. So Angiospermae, ultimately kingdom Plantae. Wheat is a monocot plant. Triticum aestivum. Triticum belongs to the grass family Poaceae. Order is Poales. Notice how it ends with ales in plants. Order ends with ales in plants. The suffix is ales. Okay. In plants, remember this. This is monocot. So class is Monocotyledonnae. That will also produce flowers. So it's Angiospermae. Ultimately, kingdom will be plant kingdom. So from any of these, questions can be asked. Okay. So you must memorize all of this. With that, we've come to the end of this chapter. Hopefully, all the concepts are clear and you've understood really well. If you want questions for practice from this chapter, kindly head to the PW app. The link to this batch is given in the description box. So click on it. You don't have to pay a dime. It'll be free. You just have to enroll there. Over there, you will get all the lectures. You can watch them without ads, and you can, download the same notes and also get access to DPP questions. All right. Again, I'll see you in the next lecture. Until then, don't waste time. Okay. So study really well for the upcoming NEET 2025 exams. I'll meet you very soon in the next week. Thank you.